Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear. To support and defend. The Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies. Foreign and domestic. And to bear true faith. And allegiance to the same. That I will obey. The orders of. The President of the United States. And the orders of. Those officers. Appointed over me. According to regulations. And the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God.
Throughout the history of America, soldiers have fought in war after war to preserve freedom for all Americans. Their bravery and heroism have been told and retold in an effort to honor the sacrifice of our veterans. First Baptist Church at the Villages has among its membership real heroes who fought and sacrificed. Veterans with stories of God's divine protection. Real heroes who have endured the horrors of war. Veterans who have served faithfully among peace times, but were always willing to fight while freedom was threatened. And veterans who never served in an equipped role for battle, but vitally supplied various needs and carried out functions that supported those that did fight. You are our heroes. We honor you today. It was July 1914. The United States had isolationist policies in place and originally wanted to stay out of the ongoing World War, otherwise known as the Great War or World War I. But the U.S. eventually got involved after two incidents caused by Germany. The first, the sinking of the RMS Lusitania, was seen as an act of aggression, for many U.S. citizens were on board. The second was the Zimmerman Telegram, in which Germany persuaded Mexico to join their cause against the U.S. and in return would get back territories lost in the Mexican War. The telegram was intercepted by Great Britain and shared with the U.S., causing the U.S. to officially join the war in 1917.
Tell me about your grandfather.
He was in WW1 and he was in WW2. He managed to survive the Depression. He managed to survive the segregated military and retire as a captain.
In the 1930s, America's desire to remain neutral and isolated resulted in a hands-off response to the increasing tensions across Europe and Asia. Tensions continued to escalate. Germany took control of Austria. Hitler and Mussolini formed the Axis military alliance between Germany and Italy. The alliance was soon joined by Japan, and America became more interested in the war when Hitler invaded Poland. England and France soon declared war on Germany. Hitler expanded his territory by taking Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and Belgium. In June 1940, France fell to Germany, and America began a true build-up in anticipation of actively entering the war. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 service personnel and civilians, and damaging or destroying 8 battleships. And America officially entered the war. But by that time, the entire world was at war, and America would be forced to fight in 2 arenas, Europe and the Pacific. At the beginning of America's involvement, Hitler's reign of terror prompted an international drive to take down Germany first. Allied forces under the direction of Dwight Eisenhower were victorious in northern Africa and in securing the Atlantic Seaway. Mussolini was overthrown in Italy. All of this led to the invasion of France on D-Day, June 6, 1944. The invasion was a decisive victory for America that turned the tide of war. But the victory came at a terrible loss. There were 10,000 Allied casualties in the D-Day invasion. The crippled but still powerful German army launched a counterattack in December 1944. They had advanced deep into Belgium, creating a dent, or a bulge, in the Allied line. From December 1944 till January 16, 1945, Allied forces fought the Germans from the north to the south in the Battle of the Bulge. German forces were destroyed, but again, victory was costly. There were 77,000 Allied casualties.
Your dad, as I understand, he was a key person in one of the most decisive battles in World War II.
He was only 18 years old, and that's such an important thing to remember because they were just kids. My dad was a radio operator and repairman, and the Germans were knocking out all the bridges so the Allied forces couldn't get into Germany. Now they had pushed them back, and they were doing really well, but the Germans were blowing up the bridges all along the Rhine. And the last bridge was the Ludendorff Bridge, and that was a crucial piece of the war. They and other Allied forces were there at the bridge. Now they were a little ways away from the bridge when they captured a German soldier who gave them the information that the bridge was going to be blown at 4 o'clock that day. They had like 45 minutes to get there, and they were a good 20 miles away. So they booked it on down there. Nobody thought about the fear or the fact that the planes were now trying to blow the bridge. They had actually collapsed one of the piers that held the bridge up when they got there. Now 3 of the men went out to cut the cable to the explosives. They had minutes. It was really, scary. They got out there and their pliers could not cut the cables. So in minutes, they just gave it 3 rifle shots to the cable, and it cut the cable and disarmed these 40-pound bombs that were all across the bridge. A lot of the men died going across the bridge. I think 300 men died, and it was 2 weeks later the war ended, and that was it.
Right, and that is the infamous Battle of what?
Of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen.
Okay, was this part of the Battle of the Bulge?
Part of the Battle of the Bulge, but that was the end of the entire war.
America also had to turn its attention to defend itself against Japan in the Pacific. The Japanese victories in the Pacific, especially in the Philippines, soon forced America to take the offensive. On July 21, 1944, Americans landed on the island of Guam, and within 8 minutes of the assault, the American flag had been planted in the soil. By August 4th, the Japanese line had collapsed, and America had taken back the island of Guam. Guam became a valuable asset in the rest of the war. After conquering Guam, attention was turned to Indo-Asia. Burma Road stood as more than just a rural passage. It became a lifeline. Along this quiet stretch of earth, soldiers said their goodbyes. Families held on to hope, and a small American community found ways to support a world at war. Convoys rumbled down this path, carrying supplies and courage alike down Burma Road.
He was in a signal unit. After training, he spent most of his time in Europe and in Burma and India. They were anticipating going over into that theater around India, and they needed a way to get supplies back and forth and so forth. And what he did was they sent troops to build a road, Lido Road, that would go from China so that they would have a corridor for getting supplies back and forth. Well, in order to do that, they needed also communications. They had no communications wires or lines or anything. So what Daddy did is he strung communication wires and lines up the Himalayan mountains. What they did is during that time, of course, the Army was still segregated.
By September 1944, General MacArthur was poised to launch an invasion of the Philippines, but he needed the support of Nimitz Pacific Fleet. After a period of indecision about whether to invade the Philippines or Formosa, the Joint Chiefs put their support behind MacArthur's plan. On October 20, 1944, a few hours after his troops landed, MacArthur waded ashore onto the Philippine island of Leyte. That day, he made a radio broadcast in which he declared,
"People of the Philippines, I have returned."
In January 1945, his forces invaded the main Philippine island of Luzon. In February, Japanese forces at Bataan were cut off, and Corregidor was captured. Manila, the Philippine capital, fell in March, and in June, MacArthur announced his offensive operations on Luzon to be at an end.
I want to talk a little bit about your dad, Mac.
I'm not quite sure how General MacArthur and my dad met officially, but General MacArthur really took a liking to my dad, and from then on, he was appointed General MacArthur's driver. Actually, my dad and several other of the soldiers built the planks that General MacArthur would walk on so he wouldn't get his trousers wet, but invariably that did not happen. So yes, he was very fortunate to be there when that encounter happened.
And there's actually, the National Geographic did a feature article on MacArthur in 1992, and we got a copy of that, as you can see on the screen there. And that was commemorating his walk into the Philippines. And where is he in that picture?
He is right behind the general, and he is not carrying his rifle. The other person to General MacArthur's right would be carrying my dad's rifle, because General MacArthur trusted my dad with a pistol, just in case there was something to surface.
In August 1945, President Harry Truman made a decision to send atomic bombs to 2 Japanese cities. Hiroshima was the first target on August 6th, followed by another bomb on the city of Nagasaki on August 9th. Over 100,000 Japanese were killed instantly. On September 1st, 1945, Japan unconditionally surrendered. By the end of World War II, over 12 million American soldiers had joined or been drafted into the American forces. After World War II, the 38th parallel was the dividing line separating North and South Korea. In 1950, North Korea pushed below the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. This was the spot that ignited the Korean War. In June 1950, President Harry Truman sent in American troops to defend South Korea. General Douglas MacArthur led an amphibious assault at Enson. The territory to the 38th parallel was regained. The two armies continued to fight for this position for years, until the war was officially ended when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed an armistice in July of 1953. Over 54,000 died in the Korean War, but the pre-war boundary between North and South Korea was reestablished. With Russia and the United States only 2 miles apart, critical intel was needed to help defend our freedoms. Some of the most important pieces come from the intelligence our soldiers collected both here and abroad, from land to sea to skies.
But during basic, they give you a battery of tests. I came up to be a airborne radio operator. Now, when I got to Eglin, they asked me what I did, so I figured the Air Force knew what they were talking about, so I told them I was a radio operator. So I ended up stringing telephone wires through all the ranges at Eglin. And one day, I happened to see this guy running around with a camera. I said, boy, that looks like a pretty good job. So I went to the first sergeant. I said, Sarge, how about me going to photo school, which happened to be in Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. In the meantime, we'll assign you to the photo lab. So when I got to the photo lab, my job was putting cameras and the gun cameras on the fighters. When a fighter goes up and shoots a machine gun, every 12 bullets a tracer, and the camera picks them up and sees where they're going. But in order to do this, I had to set up the generator and get in the cockpit, and I was scared. I was scared. I was 18 years old, and I was scared I'm going to touch the wrong button and go shooting out of that son of a gun. I got on a troop ship, the USS President Jackson, which was a troop ship out of the First World War. We looked like a bunch of immigrants getting off because it was 56 below in Fairbanks and Ladd. I went to our barracks, and they asked me what. Now I'm a little smarter now. They asked me what I did. Now I told them I was a photographer. I'm a little bit smarter now. So I told them I was a photographer, so they put me in the photo lab where I went on-the-job training to be a photographer. We did everything up there. We took pictures of car accidents, and we also took pictures of plane crashes. A plane crashed up in Little Diomede. Now, Little Diomede, I think it's out in the Siberian Ocean. There's Little Diomede and there's Big Diomede. One's American and one's Russian. Just to take aerial photographs. And somebody would want something mapped. So we would go up in the L-20 and the camera was mounted in the bottom of the plane. Most of that stuff was top secret, so we didn't know what we were taking pictures of. But the pilot, he would fly the route and he would tell us when to turn the camera on and when to turn the camera off.
Even though you weren't in Korea, you weren't in the combat zones.
Right.
You still had a critical job to do.
You know, I really don't, because that was all top secret, so I really didn't know. I only had a secret clearance.
In 1954, France was fighting communist rebels from Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. President Eisenhower explained that even though Vietnam seemed insignificant, Indochina was actually strategically important, because if Vietnam fell to the communists, communism would spread. America began its role in Vietnam by sending financial aid and military advisors to assist France. But what began in such a small way resulted in a total of 2.5 million American troops being sent to Vietnam over the next 20 years.
So first I want to take us all the way back to the early days of Vietnam.
Okay.
All right? And I want you to tell us about the time you were an airborne ranger.
Okay, well, when I first went into the Army as a regular Army officer, we were required to go either airborne or ranger or both at that time. It was interesting, especially since I had never been in an airplane before to go up and to jump out. But that was interesting, and you're wearing your airborne wings and ranger tabs and things of this nature. Your troops already know that you are one of the few that have made a unique cut in the Army. When I went off to Vietnam as a young infantryman, when I got off the aircraft, walking down the ramp, I looked over at the hangar, and I had never seen anything like it. The hangar was full of caskets draped in American flags. What a first impression going into a battle zone. So that was my initial introduction into Vietnam. I became the commander of the Quick Reaction Force. One of our helicopters went down for whatever reason. We went in to make sure that those Americans on board were safe. I was blessed as a colonel in the Army, having served in 3 conflicts from Vietnam to went to Noriega and Panama, and then in Desert Storm, to have brought home every one of my soldiers alive.
The Vietnam War caused a great division among the American population. College students fought against the war through campus demonstrations. But despite the protests, the war escalated in 1965 when the Viet Cong attacked Marine barracks at Pleiku, killing 8 and injuring over 100. President Lyndon Johnson then ordered American forces forward, hoping that the Viet Cong would realize America's resolve and would withdraw. But instead, it seemed to motivate the Viet Cong, and the war then escalated. By 1968, there were more than 500,000 troops ordered to Vietnam. From that time until 1973, the fighting continued, as did the violent protests to the war in Vietnam.
Prior to coming here to Florida to our church, you served in Vietnam, 2 tours. Tell us about your first tour.
Well, the first tour was in 1966. It was pretty early in the campaign, and I was a young lieutenant. I went over there not knowing exactly what job I would have, but exactly turned out to be a postal officer. So I was the postman for the northern part of South Vietnam. My successor was killed on the same road that I went over several times by landmine on his way to Hue. But I had a college friend who was over there, first time out in a helicopter to be dropped in a landing zone. Here's a guy who never made it to the war, but was a casualty. And of the war, 58,000 people died in the war.
Well, after that, you returned home, and what kind of welcome did you get coming home?
Well, kind of a hero's welcome. Everyone at that time thought that we were doing the right thing in Vietnam, and people couldn't do enough for you. They found out you were in Vietnam. I even escaped a traffic ticket because of that.
All right, now you turn around and you went back for a second tour. Tell us about that.
I saw some situations there, again, referring back to the people who died not as a result of combat. There were 300 who died of self-inflicted wounds. And I found out about a month after I got there, the guy who lived in my hooch had spread his poncho liner out, laid down in the middle of it, and shot himself. A lot of tragedies that didn't necessarily have to do with combat. Major that came in, they always come to the base camp for a couple of days and then get sent out into their respective unit in the field. And he was there, and I observed that he had problems with the boardwalk. The boardwalk wasn't that wide, maybe 3 feet wide, and he kept stepping off of it. And I thought, this guy's going to have a problem. He kept stepping off the boardwalk, and the thing that they tell you in the field, if you're out in a rice paddy where there are landmines all around, that you step in the same track as the person in front of you. He got a leg blown off. He didn't survive. I just think he probably lost the will to live.
So now you come home for the second time. Was it like the first time?
You know, the war protests were going on or already started and deep into it. And I had to actually step over people with ketchup on them to get to work many days. I was spit at, cursed at, totally different experience than the first time.
By January 27, 1973, America and North Vietnam signed the Paris Peace Accords, which ended the war. This included the immediate release of American prisoners and the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam within 60 days. The accords were designed to bring an end to the North Vietnamese aggression. However, soon after America left the country, war broke out again, resulting in victory for the North Vietnamese in 1975. There were over 58,000 American deaths in Vietnam and more than 150,000 wounded.
Tell me about your involvement in Vietnam, because you played kind of a critical role that people don't really think about. Tell us about that.
Well, I went over not with a rifle in my hand. I went over with my medical experience, training as a medical specialist to save lives. My faith had to be strengthened because the fear of going to war, every soldier has to face that, was very evident when I first got there. And for a person who had been in training to be a medical specialist, which I worked in a dispensary and evacuation hospital, is equivalent to emergency room. You have injured people and sick people coming in every 12-hour shift, and I was on 12-hour shifts, and I wasn't prepared for it. And God had prepared a person, my partner, the person that I worked with and also roomed with. He was a Christian. And right off the bat, he started asking me questions about my faith, which I found difficult to answer. And the third day I was there, we had a rocket attack in our area, and we had been trained to go to bunkers that hopefully will provide protection for us. And this was like at 4:30 in the morning, and I jumped up with fear on my mind and started running for the bunker, and realized that if I kept running, I would hurt myself because I would go over a little balcony and fall on the ground. But finally, I got in the bunker, and you can hear the rockets, landing. And about 2 minutes, my roommate comes walking in like he's going for a morning walk. And when we got back to the room, I said, you didn't hear those rockets coming in?" He said, "Yes, Otis, but my faith is in God. And if God that's the way I was going to end my service in this country, so be it. Other than that, I am not going to act in fear. I act in my faith." And from that point on, I realized, Pastor Charles, something was missing in my life. Being a recent college graduate and everything, having an ego as big as the ocean, I realized that what my mom had told me came back to my mind and to my spirit, is that God was in Vietnam too, and he wanted me to get to know him.
In the time between the Korean War and the Persian Gulf War, outside the restraints of Vietnam, the U.S. was in a strategic game of chess with Russia, otherwise known as the Cold War. The Cold War was the most important political and diplomatic issue of the early post-Korean period. The main Cold War enemies were the United States and the Soviet Union. Cold War got its name because both sides were afraid of fighting each other directly. In October 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a tense 13-day political and military standoff over the installation of nuclear-armed Soviet missiles on Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. shore. President Kennedy called for the Soviet Union to dismantle and withdraw its missiles from Cuba. When Soviet Premier Khrushchev refused, the U.S. enacted a naval quarantine around Cuba, intercepting all Cuban-bound Soviet ships and turning away those thought to be, or confirmed to be, carrying weaponry. Khrushchev considered this quarantine on Cuba an act of aggression and ordered Soviet ships to proceed, not only escalating the potential for armed conflict between the two superpowers, but nuclear war.
My name is Ivan Jocelyn. I served in the Navy and the submarine force for most of my career, but full Navy career started in 1954 and retired in 1992. And I'd been in college for 2 months and my draft notice came in. So the next Monday night I rode into the Navy Reserve Center in Asheville, North Carolina, went across the quarterdeck, they saluted me, and 5 minutes later I was standing in front of the American flag with my hand up, taking the oath, and little did I realize that I was casting my lots for the rest of my life. Well, after submarine school, we had a chance to select the port that we wanted to serve in, and I selected Key West, and I got orders to go to the Sea Poacher down in Key West. Went aboard in 1960. We became very actively involved in the Cuban crisis along with other submarines out of Key West. But we had been hand-selected for a special mission that none of the other submarine skippers or submarines knew about, and only 3 of us on board the submarine knew what the mission was, and that was the commanding officer, the executive officer, and chief of the boat. I should have said there are 4 of us, and I was the first lieutenant and the weapons officer. And so we had been sworn to top secret mission, and but we were very involved in standing guard during the Cuban crisis, and ended up being the submarine that had torpedo war shots loaded, and we were tracking the Soviet submarine, Soviet ship that was bringing missile components to Havana. We tracked him right until President Kennedy had given Khrushchev a line and said, if you cross this line in the ocean with that ship bringing missile components, we're going to sink you to the bottom. But we were the submarine that was sitting at the end of that line with the periscope up, watching this merchantman come down the pike. And he got about 3,000 yards from that line, imaginary line, and all of a sudden he did a left turn and headed out to sea. So that's how close we came. We were on full standby with 30 seconds notice to hit the button to fire torpedoes. We had a spread of 4 torpedoes ready to go, and they were loaded and they were war shots, and we would open the doors to the torpedo tubes were open, and I was the guy that would have pressed the firing button if the president had told us to do so. It was a super tense moment. The sobering part of it is that you realize then and every day after that if you'd ever had to press that button, it absolutely would have started World War III, and who knows what kind of nuclear response they would have had to that. And it was not until about 45 years later that the top secret classification of that mission was removed so that I could talk about it. I had never mentioned it to a soul in my lifetime, including my family, had no clue what we had been involved in.
The next day, Khrushchev initiated a call to President Kennedy. A deal was made, and the Soviets yielded to President Kennedy's demands when the U.S. agreed not to invade Cuba and to remove all the NATO and U.S. missiles from Turkey. After the Cold War and many other intermediate skirmishes, the United States became involved in major conflicts in the Middle East. In the First Persian Gulf War in 1991, coalition forces invaded Kuwait in southern Iraq on February 24th, and over the next 4 days defeated the Iraqis and liberated Kuwait. Following Desert Storm, the Americans were plunged into a new war against a new enemy, terrorism. In the remote mountains of the Hindu Kush in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, CNN correspondent Peter Arnett asked Osama bin Laden, "What are your future plans?" With the slightest smirk, bin Laden replied, "You'll see them and hear about them in the media, God willing." The interview took place in March 1997. It was bin Laden's first television interview, and it was the first time the al-Qaeda leader declared war on the United States to a Western audience. Growing in parallel to this gathering storm of jihadist violence in the 1990s was the wave of far-right terrorism in the U.S. Terrorism, which is commonly defined as politically motivated violence directed at civilians by entities other than a state, can and does come from all sides of the political spectrum. On September 11, 2001, our country experienced an unprecedented terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. The worst American attack on American soil, the United States moved toward a doctrine of first strike, preemptive war to eliminate threats to our national security. Drawn into this arena were Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, along with the ever-present threat of Russia. With this constant threat, we were soon engaged in what would be the longest conflict in our nation's history, Afghanistan and the Taliban.
So, I mean, you just got a long legacy. I mean, your grandfather, your father, and your daughter, but your daughter
Yes.
is involved in the military.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
She went to college on a ROTC scholarship. She went to airborne jump school. Her first assignment when she got out was up on the DMZ in Korea. She just had to go up to the headquarters building in Balad for something, and she was the only one that was out of the building, and the building was bombed. They called it the death road from Balad to Baghdad, and that's where that we would get our supplies shipped over there. And every once in a while, you would get a commander that just wanted to show whatever. and send them up and down that road, which was full of mines, just to have a presence that we're here. And then her convoy, the last convoy got bombed, and she said, "Mom, I'm coming home."
In the following years, our technology improved. Our forces began to expand beyond the seas and the air. Space became a new frontier in which not only to explore, but to extort. America would now be facing increasing threats from several nations that would be exploiting the usage of a new threat, ICBMs, otherwise known as intercontinental ballistic missiles. Today we face nothing new in terms of conflicts, but the stage has been shifted, and it is our brave men and women of our military that will continue to step up to the call and give of themselves for you and for me.
It's the first assignment doing missile operations. We said take a career field that's pretty easy to do most anywhere else. At least in personnel was good, so she worked personnel while I was on crew. She was kind enough to say it's your career, and she'll work her career along with it as you need to. So when I was then assigned to Los Angeles Air Force Base to work in the Strategic Air Command Systems office there, we then had to work her assignment. So she was able to get a job as an executive officer for the Milstar satellite communications program there.
Which is another career field.
Yeah.
It's not personnel, so it's a little bit of a shift.
And I was going captain to major while I was there, but I was working at the headquarters level while she was looking at the base level for personnel. Meaning if you had nuclear war going on for some reason, you could still get communications through and whatnot. So the program that she was working was one that was critical to the Strategic Air Command to ensure that it would be brought online and those satellites would be put up in space.
So in an indirect, almost direct way, you had something to do with Reb's.
What I was working on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he
Yeah.
was our liaison officer too.
When you had to go to Moscow and do some negotiations.
So that would after I got the headquarters assignment, they brought me into the headquarters to work with their International Arms Control Office there. It was a colonel in charge at the time, that program. And they brought me in because of my nuclear background plus now my space background. And they had me also involved with the nuclear arms control treaties. Some of the activities associated with some of our telemetry equipment for the missiles and whatnot, we had to go into Russia to do that. And so we were the first team of U.S. people to ever go to Plesetsk missile range for Russia. Is their premier missile test range, just like Vandenberg Air Force Base is ours for doing test launches into the Kwajalein Atoll to make sure our weapon systems are working properly. So obviously we were briefed on what things to be looking for as we went in there, because they said, you're the first eyes ever to be in that area. So we went in there, did our negotiations, saw the equipment, they saw our equipment, whatnot. And it was an interesting environment to see. Like, I was shocked at the environment because you're going, if this is their premier test range, you would think everything would be like top notch. You felt like you were back in the 1950s. Wow. I saw, on a Sunday where they let us stroll, they kept us in control. They weren't going to let us see a lot of things. And in fact, we heard a launch, and I looked at a couple of the Russian folks that were there, and I just sort of smiled at them, and they just sort of smiled back like, yeah, you weren't going to take us out to see that launch, were you? But anyhow, what you see was families going out there. They got the old wooden sleds and whatnot, and you're going like, wow, I just felt like you were back in the 50s for a test range. It was like that.
Our veterans throughout the years not only prepared and fought for our freedom in battles around the world, but many had other vitally important roles that supported those that did. From researchers to preventative techniques, to mental and health support, and even paying our brave men and women who deserved so much more than they received. These veterans receive our recognition and thanks just as much.
I was in the Navy from 1951 to 1952. At that time, my husband sat behind me in the dispersing office at our desk, and I audited he would type the pay records. Whenever you were transferred, you carried your orders and your pay record at that time. This is before computers. And we could not erase or anything, so we learned how to use a razor blade to correct our mistakes. And whenever you were transferred, you always took your pay record with you.
I know you didn't see battle in Vietnam, but you had an interesting job that, even though obscure it may seem, it was vital to an extent to the war. Can you tell us what that job was?
Well, you know, basically, I was in the Medical Service Corps. The Medical Service Corps it has a number of types of professionals, optometrists, pharmacists, sanitary engineers, entomologists, which I was. None of us saw any battle, obviously, but I was in preventive medicine for the most part. And preventive medicine, the idea there was to keep soldiers healthy and their families healthy too, or any diseases spread by, in my case, what they call arthropods, insects, mosquitoes. And I think I've told you that there were like 25,000 cases of malaria in Vietnam. So basically it was preventive medicine, trying to keep people healthy.
A major concern for those returning from battle were issues centered around health, both physically and mentally. We had a wealth of veterans whose job was to not only deal with their own participation in the military, but also to help those most in need.
I started off as a Navy gal in Great Lakes, and then I transferred into the Army National Guard. But what they utilized us for is after 9/11, when everybody was being activated, our job was to stand up the community-based healthcare organizations stateside. So our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who got injured could come home and be at home with their families, healing and having care. And once they got to their max capacity, then we had the option to see if they were going to be able to be retained and stay in, or if they needed to be discharged, and then we would work on getting their next step of life and getting them back into the community. Our soldiers were going over and coming back, and a lot of them were repeats, so we were having to be more cautious, making sure that they were mentally and physically ready to go, because the soldiers that we were sending over, once they get over there and they're in that situation a while, the mental health aspects of it, they felt safer being in a war zone than they did in their own house. They knew what to expect in a war zone, and it was hard to come home to the quiet and deal with the things that they always did. And while they were gone, their families wouldn't understand the suffering that they were going through. And usually it took probably 4 to 6 months before the soldiers really started seeing some of the symptoms. And they themselves didn't see it. It would be the family that would notice that they weren't going out with their friends anymore, and they were becoming more withdrawn, and they would just pull away. Or I had one soldier, and while he was deployed, his daughter was born, and she went to wake him up in the morning, and she came dancing with her little ponytails to wake up Daddy, because Daddy was home, and Daddy was startled awake and had raised a fist to her, and it broke him to see his daughter scared from him coming home with them.
Have served with an amazing program here at First Baptist with Grief Share. But actually, your service extended far beyond Grief Share here. It extended through several wars. Tell us about a little bit what you did that's like Grief Share here.
Okay. Well, when I was in active duty, I worked in drug and alcohol. That was a very hard program, which I was working on my master's degree, and I went to go into counseling. So they put me in that organization. And I did counseling for them for recovery. So I learned a lot about the addictions. But my feel for the grief share and the loss and how grief works came later in my career. When I was out of the Army and I became the Employee Assistance Director at Fort Hood Military Base, and the family members, when they lost their loved ones, then we had to deal with them. I also had to deal with soldiers because I was a critical incident team chairperson, and that means any incident that happened for loss, and watching the soldiers, it was pretty drastic.
Carol, I know this is probably hard to talk about, but you had to deal with some personal issues at home with your late husband, Arthur. And if you can you tell us this sobering story?
When I was in the military with addiction, so I was just doing some volunteer work while I was with my reserve unit. And this young man started talking about Stoneface, situation with Stoneface. And I said, Stoneface? And I recognized that he was talking about him was my husband. So I asked him, you in Vietnam? I said, with the 2nd or 16th? And he said, yes. I said, Benoit? He said, yes. And he went on to tell the story again about they were walking together, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he said Stoneface stopped to tie his shoes, and Baker kept walking. And said he kept walking, and all of a sudden, this explosion happened. And there was Baker there, and they took their ponchos and took his body parts to go take them back for them to fix them and put him together again. So that's what they kept telling him, it's going to be all right. That's what they were doing. And at that moment, I froze because I couldn't even imagine that. And we stopped the session, and I talked with my co-facilitator, and I was crying, and I was very upset that my husband never mentioned this. It's never gone on. I had no indication. So he just told me, he said, I wanted to confront Arthur about it, and he told me, he said, you cannot do that. You know, the first rule of counseling, you never open up a box that you can't close. He said, he's found a way to deal with it. Let it stay closed.
Aside from the direct military involvement, we have veterans that supported, trained, and even instigated the involvement of our military that continues to be world-leading. We say thank you to those too.
You worked for the Department of Defense.
Yes.
As a teacher.
Correct.
Where at?
Germany and throughout Europe for 14 years, and then Asia, in the Asia Theater for 7 years. When we have troops or airmen or sailors stationed any place in the world, we must provide for them everything that they would have would they be in the United States. If I have a child that was in my classroom in Japan and they transfer in the middle of the year to Germany, they have the same curriculum.
1975.
Okay.
The Army thought I was the right guy to be selected to go there and develop a program to successfully integrate women into the academy. Because no or very few men felt that women belonged in the military, one, and in the combat arms, two, no way. And to go to a school whose job was to develop combat leaders like West Point, that was a hard-fought program. I am so proud of what those women have accomplished and what they stood for as we took an opportunity to help level the playing field. The other issue was, however, their ability to physically do the things that were required of cadets. My grandson was selected to go to West Point. And when he went to his orientation, he asked me to go up with him for the orientation, and I did. At the closing ceremony, the master of ceremony stood up and said, "We have a special guest here." And everybody's looking around to see who this is. And he said, "We have a colonel here who was responsible for the first women coming into West Point. And we want to thank you for that." They said, "But we really have something really special for you today." And I said, "Oh, what is that?" They said, "We have the first woman who graduated in the class that you helped get through, who's here to say a few words." And when she came up, I was really, really amazed. And she said, "Colonel," she said, "we have looked for you for over 40 years. I said, no, this tells you how long. They said, and I would go across some of my female classmates, and they all wanted to know whatever happened to Colonel Lumpkin. And she said, and I want you to know that you are truly our hero.
And tell me, in the military, where were you stationed at?
I was stationed out of Norfolk, Virginia, the Naval Operations Base there.
And something happened when you were there that you almost got to come face to face with President Kennedy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I was selected to be what is called a plotter, or the one who presents the picture of the planes and the ships to the person in charge. In this case, it would have been the president. Very much appreciated it, and I remember them giving me this little name badge, so the president, if he had any questions, he could direct them to me by name. Warships, you don't have elevators. And if you think back in history, President Kennedy was known to have a bad back. And he said he's not going to climb those steps or ladders to get up there. And there was no one on the ship who could make him go up there. And so he did not come. They give us, like I said, the name badge, which I still have. And I still remember one thing about that name badge. It has a little bit of paint on it. Because even though the whole ship had to be in our best uniforms, what's called our dress uniforms, and that's dress blues, with the white stripes on the collar and whatnot. When one of the officers noticed that there was a place that needed to be painted, so he had all the members of my division go down and paint that spot. And I'm painting in my dress blues, and I get a little paint on that little name tag. The paint is still there. It's a small spot, but it is still there. But I won't forget that.
It was in the Pentagon, and I became General Colin Powell's briefer in the Pentagon. And that was an interesting time in my life. I was his briefer for almost 2 years. And I watched him. Everyone wanted to know, are we best friends? And I said, well, I would like to say yes, but it's not so. I was just his briefer at the time. But in the way that particular process worked, there's something in the Pentagon called the tank. And the tank is only occupied by the various service chiefs, the 4-star generals that run each service. And there are only 3 briefers allowed in there: the logistics briefer, the intelligence briefer, and the operations briefer. And I was the logistics briefer. And as I sit there, I learned so much over time from these individuals whose job was the leadership of our nation. General Powell, I was just so impressed with the way he did business and the amount of integrity and honesty that he brought to the
Even though we have highlighted the many roles of our brave men and women of our military, we must be careful to recognize another group of people that carried the weight as much, if not more, than our vets. They are our spouses of the veterans.
So, Carol, can you tell me about these, what we call sometime forgotten people?
Yeah, I think they are the combat backbones for our soldiers. They fight at the home front. And when our guys go off to war, we have to step in and fill both sets boots and heels. In the early 60s, they didn't have a lot of the supports that they have now. And I think due to my generation in there, that they became aware of some of the supports that the wives needed. The thing is that as a wife, we looked at, you're making all of these moves and you start out with scratch in your kitchen and stuff. So the Army had started what they call a Army Community Services. And I just happened to be in the front run in Germany when we put it together, and I had the opportunity to work with Colonel Patton's wife, who helped us at Stuttgart, Germany.
Now, what would war be without those light-hearted moments and events that in some way kept the sanity of our soldiers during those sobering moments of service?
I want to hear about this incident that happened to you while you were on the medical team supporting our Marines.
So one drill weekend, myself, I was an officer, probably a lieutenant commander at that point, and we go out with these Marines to all these trainings, and some were in a classroom, and we just went all around everywhere. But as the day went on, we have one where they went to a shooting range. And so I sat there and I was pretty attentive to this one because I'd never shot a gun. I hadn't even ever held a gun. So this training, I listened, and then the guys, it was mostly men, young men, and they would go up to the line and they would load their weapon and shoot the target. So we got up to the end, and this instructor comes over to me and he said, "Ma'am, would you like to try?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know." And I thought, I know what to do because I listened to the training. So I get up there, or stand across. It's like this wooden shelf kind of thing, and so I go up, and so they had a sort of sequence. You go and you pick up the gun, you eject the cartridge, and you put the gun down, and then you load your bullets. And so I'm there, and I'm trying to put this bullet in, and it won't go. And I'm looking around, and everybody else is like, whip, 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 load it. And I'm like, what's wrong here? And I just kept pushing and pushing. And finally, he must have probably been 12. It looked like he was 12, but there's this little Lance Corporal. He sort of leans over and he says, "Ma'am, you're putting your bullets in backwards." So that was a pretty humbling experience for me.
I was in the military. My girlfriend, we were both military, walking on the 4th of July, and our husbands was walking with us. And you know how they shoot off all the fireworks on the 4th of July? And all of a sudden, the fireworks went off, and both of them hit the ground and rolled over next to the wall. And Pam and I were standing there because we were not Vietnam veterans, active duty type stuff. And we looked at them, "What are you doing there?" And they looked sort of like embarrassed that they had done, but they both hit, immediately, both of them hit the ground and they rolled. And Pam said, "You all better get up off of that ground." He said, "Why did you do that?" And all of a sudden I said, "They're Vietnam vets." And that's because another missile went choo like that. And that's what we thought. But we laughed about it after that, and it was joked with him about it. But he said that was a life-saving skill.
If I'm not mistaken, I recall a specific duty that you were given in the Navy. Why don't you tell us about that?
I was a second-class sonar technician on a destroyer escort, and we were located in our sonar shack behind the Combat Information Center, which is behind the bridge, so it's up at the top of the ship. I was sitting on watch one night, and a chief from the Combat Information Center popped in and said, "Sonar, it's your turn to make coffee." So the watch leader, who was a first class, looked around, and there's 3 second classes, and I'm the junior. He said, "Wade, you need to go make coffee." I said, "No." "What? You need to go make the coffee." I said, "No, I don't drink coffee. I'm not going to make it. Let somebody make it that drinks coffee." So we argued a couple minutes, and finally he said, "I'm going to write you up, and you're going to go to captain's mast." Well, I'd already been to captain's mast. I didn't want to go again, so I said, "Okay, I'll go get it." So I go in, I get the 5-gallon coffee pot, go down, open a door, step through, dog it down, go down a ladder, set the coffee pot down, open a scuttle, climb down through it, take the coffee pot down, pull the scuttle down, tighten it down, do the same thing on the next deck, go down through, tighten everything down, because you got to maintain watertight security. Go around to the next doorway, open that door, step through, dog it down, go down the passageway, because we're at sea. Go through another door, that's a berthing compartment, and it's dark and everybody's asleep, so I got to go through there quietly, dog it down, go through the open door, go into the forward head. I set the coffee pot down in a deep sink. And there's a freshwater faucet and a saltwater faucet. So I filled that coffee pot up with 5 gallons of Pacific Ocean, take it out. Now comes the reason I didn't want to make it in the first place. I got 5 gallons of water. I got to go through all these doors, dog them down, go open the other one, dog it down, walk down this long passageway because we're rolling at sea, and then come to another door, open that, close it down, go up the ladder, bounce the
coffee pot on the ladder, open the scuttle, and then lift 5 gallons of water, set it up down, go up through the scuttle, close it down, pick it up, go around, go up another ladder, do the same thing, go down through the door, open, dog it down, come in, set the coffee pot down, the coffee mess. Plug it in, make the coffee, turn it on, and then I go back into the sonar shack. After a while, I heard someone say, blankety blank blank, who made this blankety blank coffee? Wade did. What's wrong with it? I don't know, but don't ever let him make it again. I just sat there in the dark and grinned. The last time I made Navy coffee.
I understand. In the military, you have got a special, unique story about a person that you met and danced with.
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
I was at Clark Air Base, Philippines. It was a DOD show with Miss America and several of the contestants. I went to it just for the fun of it. And then she says, for our next number, we're going to need volunteers and we're going to come out and pick you. So I was sitting like halfway down the aisle and she stopped and she pointed at me and says, I'll dance with you. So an 18-year-old kid got to get up and dance with Miss America, Cheryl Pruitt from Mississippi.
All right, now on to the really fun stuff. There was a time when you got to do something really fun, and that was with a very special movie star person.
Yes, Bob Hope.
Yes.
Bob Hope, and who went around doing the military, giving events for the soldiers and military personnel in Vietnam. Eventually, the commander looked at me and says, you're the one in charge of the quick reaction force. You got the task. And so I went over to greet the helicopters. They opened the doors and a couple entertainers walked out. Then all of a sudden I looked, there were 7 of the most beautiful cowboy cheerleaders ever to come off the aircraft. And I looked and they all came off and they gave me a hug and welcomed me in. And I just turned around and looked at the rest of the officers and said, got you. And it was fabulous, you know. And but what was really interesting about that experience, they were supposed to leave our unit and go to another unit to perform. And we get this phone call and it said, please don't bring them because we've been under attack every day for over 2 weeks and we cannot guarantee their safety. So we said, yes, we got it. So we went back and I told them. And they all huddled up for a second and they said, look, you and these soldiers and airmen, Marines, and Navy personnel have been fighting this war 365 days. You did not take a break because it was dangerous. And what we want to do is, can you get us in there? And I said, well, I have to get approval, but yeah, we can get you in, but we can't guarantee the safety. They said, that's okay. If you guys can do what you do, then we can do what we've been sent here to do.
Though costly in so many ways, many veterans owe their life to the service of their country. When asked, they proudly stand up and say, if I had to do it again, I would do it again.
If you had the chance to do it again, would you do it again?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I have wonderful memories, and they were not all beautiful memories, but I had wonderful memories.
I would do it again because the rewards have been fabulous for me and my family.
Yes, I would. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. In fact, if I had it to do over, I would have gone active duty.
For love of country, yes. For faith in God, yes.
But yes, I would do it again. And I think, even today, that every young person should go in the military.
Absolutely. You know, I think I'm a patriot of this country.
I'd do a whole career in the Air Force again.
Absolutely. I absolutely would. That's a simple answer.
I'm proud for my service, and I would have done it again.
I got this call from the entertainment department, and they said, Colonel, would you mind coming over here? We want to talk to you. So I said, okay, I'd be happy to do that. And I went over, they said, we're about to have a big parade, and we want to honor the Vietnam veterans. And we would like to know if you and the Vietnam veterans would honor us in leading the parade right behind the flags. I said, yeah, this would be fantastic. Well, I rushed back to our meeting, which was held at Lake Myona, and I said, I'm pumped now. I'm really feeling excited about this. And I said, soldiers and fellow comrades, I said, we have been selected as the unit that would lead the parade. And I'm really excited. And I looked out in the audience, and I'm the only one pumped up about this. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I said, okay, guys and ladies, hold it for a second. What's going on? They said, Colonel, you said we had to march in a parade. They said, we can no longer march. We had bad knees. We had broken hips. We have arms that with rotator cuffs. Our backs are thrown out. We cannot march. I know you're excited about this, but that's just not who we are anymore. And I looked at him and I said, listen, we are not doing this for you or for me. We are doing this for the 58,000 plus soldiers that did not come home. And we talk about not being recognized and not being appreciated. Well, this is our opportunity. And I said, if we can't march, we'll do the Vietnam Shuffle. So we, in fact, got together behind the Rialto Theater. The band struck up, the soldiers got in line, and we started around the corner. All of a sudden, where the parade actually began, we looked up, 10 to 15 people deep were all along the parade route. And they shouted with loud voices, Vietnam veterans, welcome home. Vietnam veterans, thank you for your service. God bless you, Vietnam veterans. I couldn't believe it. I had been in the Army and had been out for some time now, and I had never had anyone to do this. And I look back at the soldiers that were marching with us, and I saw a real miracle. I mean, an honest, the truthful miracle. Those bad hips and bad knees weren't so bad anymore. Their shoulders were back. They marched with pride. I looked and tears were rolling down their eyes because they had never had anything like this. And I am so thankful that Connie bought me these glasses that get dark in the sunlight, because I didn't want them to know that their colonel, who had served in 3 wars, who had served in conflict after conflict, also had tears in his eyes. My throat was filled. And the more we marched, the louder the cheers came. The more people stood to their feet and clapped and made us feel so proud to have been a Vietnam veteran. And when we got back to the assembly area, my soldiers looked at me and I looked at them. They saluted to me. I saluted back. We didn't say anything. We just went home.
Like the veterans who had gone before them, Americans still serve in harm's way to protect us even today. Our armed forces risk their lives to secure our freedom. It's been said that freedom has special taste to those who have fought and almost died, that the protected will never know. Surely that statement is true. Only those who have been willing to sacrifice everything for the cost of freedom can completely understand its value. For those of us who have been protected, those who live freely today because of our valiant soldiers, those of us who enjoy America, the beautiful, and can pass freedom down to our children, we honor you. We truly appreciate you for serving. We appreciate you and your families for the sacrifice you made. We don't say it nearly enough, but we thank you. We thank you. Thank you.
celebrate Veterans Day on the anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I. The armistice that began on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The timing of this holiday is quite deliberate in terms of historical fact. But somehow it always seems quite fitting to me that this day comes deep in autumn when the colors are muted and the days seem to invite contemplation. It is, in a way, an odd thing to honor those who died in defense of our country, in defense of us, in wars far away. The imagination plays a trick. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise, but most of them were boys when they died, and they gave up two lives, the one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for our country, for us. And all we can do is remember. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. In memory of those who gave the last full measure of devotion, may our efforts to achieve lasting peace gain strength. Let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Strengthened by their courage, heartened by their value, and borne by their memory, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty.